With 14 teams on bye in the next 3 weeks, there's no more important time to strengthen your roster and lock down the right streamers. So let's get into our streamers and stashes for week 10 on the Fantasy First Down. I'm Ben Wasley. Welcome to the Fantasy First Down. I hope you're having a fantastic fantasy season to this point. If you've got any start or sit questions for this week, you can leave them in the comments, or you can wait until the Saturday start sit show. You can also message me on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down or on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no worries. Same thing goes for any trade questions you've got or ad questions as well. You can also check out my rankings over at ffdfantasyfootball.com, and my articles are at football.rasball.com. It'd also be great if you could like and subscribe on YouTube. But speaking of YouTube, let's get into today's video. And as always, we are talking streamers and stashes. And we're starting off with the quarterbacks, and there's plenty of good streaming quarterbacks at the moment. Sam Darnold has been my favorite for some time. He gets the Jaguars in a fantastic quarterback matchup, the best quarterback matchup in football. And Sam Darnold now has his full array of weapons available with the return of TJ Hawkinson as well. Now, we've made some made some errors last week against an improving Colts offense, but he still managed to put up over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. So I would expect another top 10 finish is very possible this week. Going with him is Jared Goff, who has been very quiet the last few weeks. The Lions have led heavily on the run in back-to-back blowout wins. Jared Goff's got a total of 229 yards across those 2 weeks, but this week Texas is the opponent for Detroit, and they have a very good run defense and an awful pass defense. So you would have to feel like for Goff, this is a top 10 quarterback matchup and a good chance to start him, even though it is a little bit risky this week. Someone I'm not starting this week for very obvious reasons, but very happy to stash is Bo Nix. And I got to say, preseason Ben would be very shocked by this. I was not high on Nix coming in. I always thought he was going to be pro-ready. I just didn't think he was going to be very good. And more specifically, I thought the Broncos were going to be very poor. And I thought this whole offense was going to crater and run the ball a whole heap. But Bo Nix is on an absolute tear. In the first month of the season, probably, first 4 weeks, he had more rushing touchdowns than passing touchdowns. But he's now found 5 straight top 18 fantasy finishes, and most of them have been in the top 9 as well. So while he's unstartable this week against the Chiefs, he faces the Falcons in week 11, and that's a matchup I want to attack. So Bo Nix is someone I'm happy to stash with so many buys coming up. He's someone who could be very useful for you. Now, DeAndre Swift is someone who's nearly becoming an every down starter, but he was very disappointing against the Cardinals. So I do want to reassure you, this is an absolute must-start matchup against a real struggling Patriots run defense. Now, he's losing goal line carries to Roschon Johnson, which is not ideal. And after this week, he's probably more of a sell-high candidate, but on volume alone, you just need him in your lineup this week. Another guy you absolutely must have in your lineup is Tyrone Tracy. He's probably going to be a top 10 guy for me this week. I say it every single week. Start your running backs and kickers and DSTs against the Panthers. And it is the Giants' new starter in Tyrone Tracy for me this week who you need to start. Look, I know they had a shock win against the Saints last week, did Carolina, but the Panthers are 5-point underdogs, even though they're at home this week. So I'm backing Tracy to have a really big game in this one. Now, Ramondre Stevenson has returned to the starting role in New England, and he's been terribly inefficient. But he's also been good. He's averaged under 3 yards a carry in the last 3 weeks, but he's got 10 receptions and 4 touchdowns, and that's all we really care about for fantasy. Now, is there a risk he loses volume because of how inefficient he's been? No. I just think the O-line's struggling, the offense is struggling, and so anyone that goes in at running back is going to struggle. Stevenson's at least making something happen. Now, the Bears are the best matchup he's faced in some time, so this is a good opportunity for him to lock down that starting role or at least find the end zone again, I think. Now, of course, stashes are vital in running back world, and here's some of my favorites. Trey Benson is not my favorite, but I at least wanted to highlight him. I prefer the other guys that I'll go through in a second. But the good thing about Benson is he could become a starter without an injury in front of him. James Conner is one of the Cardinals' best weapons, but in week 10, Drew Petzing, who's their OC, made a concerted effort to get Trey Benson involved, and he did it early in the game. He's gone a couple of times this season when they've either been up or down by 20 points, but this time they didn't come in a blowout. I mean, it turned out to be a blowout, but it wasn't at the time. Basically, he was just eating into James Conner's touches, and if that keeps happening, he could turn into someone that you can start, especially as a bye-week filler. But the other benefit of having Benson is that he's Conner's injury cover. Basically, through the last 7 seasons, Conner's only 7 seasons, he's never played every single game. Now, he has so far this year, and that's not how probability works. We can't suddenly say, well, he definitely won't for the rest of this year. But look, an injury might not be inevitable, but it's certainly on the cards, pun intended. Now, my favorite handcuffs, as always, Braylon Allen and also Tyler Algier. Also really like Blake Corum as well. Zach Charbonnet is a good one. Ray Davis is a very strong handcuff. Roshan Johnson, because he's getting those goal line carries, is a good bye-week filler who's also a good handcuff as well. Don't mind guys like Devin Singletary, Cam Akers, Kamani Vidal, because at least you know they're probably going to get the lead role if there's an injury ahead of them. Vidal, I'm a little bit nervous about because Gus Edwards has just started practicing, so maybe even if J.K. Dobbins goes down, it turns back into a committee, although Gus Edwards was so poor earlier in the year. Not really sure, but certainly there's 5 or 6 guys there that you absolutely must have in rosters if they're available. We're getting to that point in the season now where you should probably know who your starters are, so unless you're expecting some bye-week issues, take a pot shot on these guys because running back injuries do keep coming throughout the season, and especially if these players wear down, you're going to get more missed weeks. Now, there will become a point as we get close to the playoffs where the time period for them to actually get injured in becomes so small, it's no longer worthwhile having them on your roster. But we're not there yet. There's still 5 weeks for them to get injured before the fantasy playoffs, and it's still very possible that'll happen because we've seen a lot of injuries in running back land already. Wide receivers. Tank Dell. Look, I copped some flack last week because I put out an article on Razzball to start Tank Dell, and it got published after Tank Dell had already been played. So, sorry. I'd written it beforehand. It just didn't actually go out until after the game. So, this week, getting in early, you got to start Tank Dell. It's a fantastic matchup against the Lions. Their secondary is really struggling. Look, don't get me wrong. Nico Collins is probably back this week, and he's going to be the number 1 guy, but I still think we're going to see plenty of Dell with Collins definitely not 100%. Now, Juwan Jennings is someone who's also not 100%, but if he's healthy, and that's a big if, I'm putting him into my lineups against the Bucks. This game has shootout written absolutely all over it. And with Brandon Ayuk out, Jennings could easily be involved in the high-scoring fun. Now, the problem is there are plenty of weapons here. There's George Kittle. Christian McCaffrey seems like he's going to be back. There's Deebo Samuel, who's probably going to play. You know that with those 4 guys, 2 or 3 of them are going to have a good week, and someone is going to struggle. Could very easily be Jennings. If it's going to be one of those 4, you'd have to bet on Jennings, but the upside is still absolutely massive. Khalil Shakir seems to be the main guy for the Bills at the moment, with Amari Cooper missing last week's game and Keon Coleman badly banged up. Shakir is really the only Bills wide receiver you can rely on at the moment. Cooper's not running full routes, even when he's kind of half healthy, and I don't know what's happening with Coleman. Against the Colts, I would be shocked if he can't make it 4 weeks in a row with double-digit PPR points. So he's someone I feel positive about starting. That's not to say you can't start Cooper. He just comes with a lot more risk. Now, wide receiver streamers, and you might be tempted to put this guy in your lineup, Quinton Johnston. He had a true breakout in week 9. He finally topped 100 yards for the first time, doubling his previous second best yardage. He had 80 or so in one game, but he's mostly been under 60 odd. This week he went, 118 or something like that. But that was against the Browns, and they're just quietly one of the best out-wide matchups out there. Their secondary has really struggled to stop out-wide wide receivers. This week he faces the Titans, who aren't one of the best out-wide matchups. So I need to see Johnston do it again before I'm really to trust him in lineups, because even Josh Palmer looked pretty good in that game. And I don't know how much of what we're seeing here is Johnston and how much of what we're seeing is just the matchup. Also note that DJ Chark is now supposedly back. He could easily be back in the lineup and take some touches away from Johnston as well. So as much as I love Johnston, he was my favorite rookie receiver, at least from that 2022 draft class, which ended up spawning, say, Flowers and Jordan Addison, who's been a bit disappointing this year. Johnston was the one I liked best. I was wrong. Flowers is clearly better. Jackson Smith-Njigba, I think, is up there. He had a very good game last week as well. But Johnson is someone that I still think has a heap of potential. There was always going to be concerned about his separation ability, but he's great at the contested catch. He's got the most upside, I think, of all the receivers from that class. And he could still reach it. He could still head in that kind of Amari Cooper direction of being that big back, big contested catch back who's going to have a good career. He's just had a slow start to it. Now, Deontay Johnson, I should say. Johnson and now Johnson. Another guy who's had a bit of a slow start. This case, his start with the Ravens. Not really surprising. They only just traded for him. They're hardly going to throw him out there for a heap of routes, especially when they were clearly winning this game. There was no point in them putting him out there. Now, firstly, this is the official profile picture for Deontay Johnson on all of the official websites. I know it looks ridiculous. It looks just terribly photoshopped because it is. It's exactly the same face he had in the Panthers one. They've just put a Ravens jersey on him. It's kind of hilarious, but it is what we've got. And there's plenty of people giving up on Johnson, not because of the terrible picture, but because he had a very quiet start last week, obviously. That's insane. We've seen it happen with heaps of different players. They come in, they only play a few snaps, takes them a few weeks to get ready. Johnson's going to have a significant role, and it's going to be a clear-cut role in one of the league's best offenses. So they're not a pass-heavy offense, but we're seeing Rashad Bateman be very effective. He's like a top 20 wide receiver this season. Zay Flowers is top 10. Look, this is a great buy low opportunity on Deontay Johnson, or a pickup in some leagues. He's still available in some leagues, which is crazy. I wouldn't start him this week. I need to see him return to his full snap count, but he is someone I want on my roster. And Kayshon Boutte, this is a bit of a weird one. This is a tough matchup against the Bears, but Boutte's the one that's run the most routes of all Patriots receivers, at least recently. And that in back-to-back tough matchups, he has had 12 targets. Now, he's only put it together for 64 yards, but at least he's out there getting the targets. He's got another difficult opponent this week, but with Drake May out there, if Drake May keeps improving, you do feel like in deeper leagues, Boutte might be someone who's useful to you. Douglas is only out there in 11 personnel. Bourne, he's not looking 100% at the moment. So once they get some nicer matchups, it might be Boutte as the guy that you can start here. Not going out of my way to get him, but in deeper leagues, I have picked up Boutte. We're talking like 14-person leagues or like 12-person leagues where you've got really deep benches. That's kind of where I start looking at Boutte, especially if you're starting a lot of wide receivers. If you've got like 3 wide receiver spots and 2 flex spots, entirely reasonable you're starting 5 wide receivers in a week, and then Boutte kind of becomes a viable issue if it's a PPR league. Tight ends, and interesting names here. Tight end landscape's really flipped recently. It was just a total wasteland at one point in time. There were only like 1 or 2 guys you could feel comfortable at starting. Now there's like a dozen. It's absolutely crazy. I think Jake Ferguson might be ranked out of the top dozen this week. It certainly is by some people, and I haven't decided whether I will with him or not. I might. With Cooper Rush in for Dak Prescott. It's pretty crazy. Taysom Hill, look, I mean, the Saints have been absolutely brutalized by injuries, and Alvin Kamara is really their only healthy player. In fact, among their top 3 running backs and top 3 wide receivers from earlier this season, Kamara is the only healthy one. They've obviously lost Olave and Shaheed and also Bub Means, and they've lost Jamal Williams, at least for now. And Kendre Miller's on IR. So absolutely crazy. They've got nothing going on. Their wide receivers are like Mason Tipton, Cedric Wilson, who was admittedly their wide receiver 2 at one point in time. Sorry, wide receiver 3 at one point in time. Look, it's tricky. Equinemius St. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown's older brothers in there getting some touches too. Oh, it's real ugly. So I do expect that the Falcons are going to put up plenty of points, and that means they might need Taysom Hill to score some touchdowns to get anywhere near this game. So given his upside there of goal line runs, I do like him this week. More of a non-PPR guy, or at least half PPR, but even in PPR, I'd still consider him. And Mike Gesicki, kind of called this last week in my Saturday Start Sit show. I suggested Mike Gesicki was my favorite sneaky start last week, and he's always excellent when T. Higgins is out, and even though it wasn't a great matchup, given that he's better when the Bengals are trailing, still managed to have a massive game. Top tight end last week by a mile. Look, not shocked. It kind of expected something to happen. Not that, but certainly expected he might have a good week this week. Surely against the high-flying Ravens, the Bengals are at least going to be close, if not behind. Still got T. Higgins out. He's doubtful. I think for your Friday night, you got to get Mike Gesicki into your lineup if you need a streamer, especially in a PPR league. I really like him. I've actually moved him ahead of Taysom Hill. I think he's going to have a very big week. Jatavion Sanders is another interesting one. He's been really weird. He's been a fantasy monster when Tommy Tremble's been out, and totally toothless when Tommy Tremble's been playing. He's hardly playing snaps, playing like 20 to 30% snaps with Tremble in there. and basically an every down starter when Tremble's out. And Tremble hasn't been particularly good or effective, and Sanders has been good. And look, surely after his 87-yard outing last weekend against the Saints, where they won the game partly because of him, you'd have to think they're finally going to start starting him. But I'll see it when I believe it. It is tough with these rookie tight ends. They do try not to use them because they tend to be pretty poor at blocking. And Sanders was more of a receiving tight end in college rather than a blocking tight end. But I at least believe he's got some upside. So I'm putting him on my bench, and I'm going to see what happens. Finally, our kickers and DSTs. And you know the deal here. Someone that's owned in a lot of leagues is Young Hoku, but he's been pretty disappointing the last few weeks. And I have to feel like potentially he's going to be dropped in some leagues. I've certainly seen in some of my leagues that he's been dropped, especially the shallower one. So pick him up. He's got the second best kicking matchup against the Saints this week. The best kicking matchup is the Falcons, so he can't play against himself. So this is actually his best possible matchup. And he's an excellent kicker. He's been a fantastic kicker for a long time. He's my favorite option if he's available in your league. I know he's had a disappointing couple of weeks, but you've absolutely got to start him. And a name that I can't even pronounce, or Graham Gano. I actually don't know who's going to be starting with the Giants this week. Gano is on IR, but he has started practicing again, so it's not impossible he'll play, but I think it's probably going to be Jude McAtomney. I still can't get that right. I need a specialist to help me work out how to pronounce that name, or the pronunciation guide, one of those two. Regardless, if Koo's out, this is your guy. I know you're thinking who, not Koo, but who, and rightly so. I can't even pronounce his name, but it doesn't even matter. He's playing against the Panthers. You always start kickers against the Panthers. The Giants are favorites. They're probably going to kick a bit because they do struggle to finish drives. If this was Gano, we wouldn't even be thinking about it. So start whatever this guy's name is. Good luck to him. He's significantly better at football than I ever will be. Awesome to see him getting his opportunity. Let's see how he goes. And finally, DSTs. And look, I've talked about the Chargers a fair bit. They're only in quite a few leagues, but I'm going back to this well again. I hope you've just still got them on your roster. They've been top 3 the last 2 weeks, and I've been pretty high on them the last couple of weeks. And so hopefully you can just keep them on your roster against the Titans. They're probably the number one option this week for DSTs. And if they're not available, and they're probably not, well, the Giants have had a terrible schedule so far this season. Really difficult DST schedule. But they've had at least 4 sacks in 6 games out of their 9 games this season, which is pretty crazy. Given their opponents, that's actually really impressive. And it's great news, especially if your league's DST scoring benefits sacks and, to an extent, intercepts and fumbles forced and things like that, rather than leagues that really benefit like low point totals and low yardage totals. So this week, the Giants are massive favorites against the Panthers. The Panthers are really struggling. They did have a good win last week. But as we saw from the Browns, after you have a big upset win, you often do fall back and struggle the next week. So I'm backing the Giants this week to have a really significant win and stop the Panthers from scoring. And look, I say it every week, just start DSTs, kickers, and running backs against the Panthers. And that's all we've got for our streamers and stashes. Not a Star Sit show, that's in a couple of days' time. Streamers and stashes show on the Fantasy First Down. As always, it'll be great if you could like and subscribe and support the channel. If you got questions, pop them down below. Check us out on Instagram, Twitter, rankings on our website, articles over at Razzball. Heaps of great tools over at Razzball you should check out as well. But for now, that's it for me. I'll catch you next time on the Fantasy First Down.